My name is Jeremiah Murphy, and I'm giving my Reteach It project presentation on the role of queerness in music and its intersection with different identities. I am a huge music nerd, which is kind of why I chose this topic to talk about. And the more that I did research, the more I found that it was a really legitimate topic to do it on, and how intersectionality crosses into music. And it was actually shown, examples were shown for a couple of my favorite artists, which is what motivated me to do this project a little bit more. I'm sorry if I stutter or anything. Even if this is done through video form, I still have issues with it, but I'm going to try my best to get through this. I did this presentation earlier to a couple of my music nerd friends, but I also wanted a video version of it just so I could submit this to the class so we can interact with it a little bit more better. Yeah, so without further ado, let's just get right into it. So, the first question that I asked was, does an artist's sexuality affect the way you view their music? Now, I want you to think about this question a little bit, even if it's a pretty one-sided answer. In my opinion, it should be a one-sided answer. But I'm going to elaborate on this question a little bit furthermore down the line as I get towards the end of this presentation. As I said, I presented this to a couple of my music nerd friends, and this was another question that I asked them. I did it in form of a Google Forms sheet, and you will see the results of that later on in this presentation. But think about that question as I'm going to come back to it. So first, I want to talk about intersectionality, which was a tough concept for me to grasp at first, but I have taken a lot of classes that revolve around intersectionality a bit, and they've taught me a good amount of it. However, I think that earlier in this course, I think that YW Boston gives one of the easiest understandings of it. And this was found in Module 2, but it says, intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of people, or a social problem as affected by a number of discriminations and disadvantages. It takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexity of the prejudices they face. So once again, this was by YW Boston. Now the question here is, how does intersectionality play into music? And I decided after a bit that the best way to do it was to break it down between three different things. The ones that are the most salient to how it crosses with intersectionality. Now, the first one that I decided to talk about was the lyrics and themes. And obviously, there are a lot of different examples that I could use, because intersectionality, once again, is pretty broad, and it relates to music a ton. But the best example that I decided to use was Janelle Monáe, and I found some articles about it, which I'm going to quote, but one thing that I wrote was, Janelle Monáe uses lyrics to express a lot of the things that cross into the concept of intersectionality. On her album Dirty Computer in 2018, which was one of my favorites of the year, she explores her experiences about being a black queer woman and the true power of embracing her identity. And this is best shown on songs like Pink and Django Jane. And in Django Jane, she has a lyric which is very, very witty, as I say, and very clever, even if it's in its simplicity, which is, she says, Kool-Aid with the kale, referencing that African Americans are typically known to drink Kool-Aid and hipsters eat kale. She's ironically embracing this stereotype, celebrating these two aspects of her identity, which was an interesting thing that I found. And yes, that was written by A. Dworsky, which she wrote a whole article about Janelle Monáe and more about how the Dirty Computer album is very important, and it experiences a lot about the woman, her womanhood, being a black queer woman, and her sexuality. And this is a great, phenomenal album, which I will, furtherly talk about. Now, next, in another thing is the representation. So, representation, in my opinion, was obviously there's a lot of albums that do this. Kendrick Lamar's "To Pimp a Butterfly," and a bunch of other albums, but I found that it best crossed over with Frank Ocean in 2016, where he released his album Blonde, an album that explored the ideas of toxic masculinity, racism, and the experiences as a black man in America. Everything about this album is thought provoking, even in its cover, as it talks about kind of blonde spelled without the E and blonde spelled with the E, on how the word blonde refers to a fair-haired woman and the word blonde without the E refers to a fair-haired man. And this isn't unintentional by Frank Ocean. Frank Ocean is someone that integrates a lot of very conscious elements in his music, and the whole album Blonde is a very thought-provoking album that is best shown in representation. For the last one, I decided to say collaborations, and I think that the best two examples that I found of this were Beyonce and WizKid's collaboration on the soundtrack Brown Skin Girl, that celebrates the different shades of brown. Another example of crossing over cultures is the rap reggae crossover that Nas did with Bob Marley's son, Damian Marley. That was an interesting rap reggae crossover. So, before I get into more of this, I want to give you some examples of the history of queer representation and the way that these people kind of paved the way and the history of it. So, on Ma Rainey's "Prove It to Me," it left his mark because it challenged a lot of societal norms addressing same-sex relationships, which you could get thrown in jail from back in the 1920s. Another important one from the 1970s, which he's another pretty important artist to where I grew up in Seattle, named Patrick Haggerty, who got kicked out of Peace Corps for being gay, and on his debut album with his band Lavender Country, he storied a lot of the experiences that he got, and this album is known for being one of the first gay country albums. I'm going to talk about this one a little bit more at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to give you some examples of the history, and here are even more examples of it. Obviously, I could go on and on about the history and everything, but yeah, David Bowie and Prince, they have also challenged gender norms with the concept of intersectionality. David Bowie had his androgynous alien alter ego Ziggy Stardust, and he used the idea of gender fluidity to blur lines between normal gender roles. Now, Prince, obviously, is another one who took from a melting pot of sounds, kind of like I was talking about on the collaboration. He mixed a bunch of different genres together. He challenged a lot of stereotypes around race and masculinity through his music and style, and frequently incorporated elements of black culture into his music and performances, celebrating his identity as a black man. And Prince also, explored these themes of sexuality, desire, often challenging traditional heteronormative beliefs. Now, one of the most important topics about this, or the most important person that played into why I decided to do this, was Lil Nas X. And Lil Nas X was someone who, from the gate, was challenging societal norms. You had Old Town Road, which featured themes of cowboy culture and blackness, and challenged the traditional racial boundaries of the genre of country music. And I felt like Lil Nas X fully embraced all of the three concepts that I was talking about on how music crosses with intersectionality. So now I want to talk about intersectionality in music. There was this article by Riley Fitzgerald, which was a really good article on how Lil Nas X is defining himself as a queer black man. And she said that fans and critics alike praise Lil Nas X's in-your-face attitude and sense of individuality while attempting to categorize and put them in a box in order to fully understand him. The reason why we have failed to see Lil Nas X as a fully formed artist comes down to overlooking the role intersectionality plays in his music, as well as artists like Lil Nas X's public appearance. Lil Nas X is a black queer man, but these identities are often treated as a separate from each other. In his rise to fame as a queer artist, some have made statements such as, "This is the only gay person I can respect," and there have even been claims to say that he is not really gay. Now, as I said, does an artist's sexuality affect the way you view their music? Obviously, my two friends voted no, because it shouldn't, and I surround myself with good people, but unfortunately, that's not the case for some people, and for a majority of people, too. Lil Nas X, when he came out as gay, faced a lot of homophobic comments from other rappers in the industry, which is a whole other topic to talk about, and how homophobia in hip-hop, it was kind of accepted back then. Obviously, it's come a little bit more far with rappers like Cakes the Killer and Doja Cat and other artists that are kind of, identifying as gay or bisexual and kind of changing the way we view this stuff. But yeah, there's been a lot of controversy that Lil Nas X has gotten strictly for just being himself. And this obviously coincides with the double standard, which was talked about in the episode 2 video that the Sanford School did with Rocio Garcia, where Rocio Garcia talks about the double standard in which the police responded to protests against, white people protesting masks versus black people and allies for the movement of protesting for racial justice. Now, obviously, this is definitely different, but it also has a lot of similarities in itself. And I think Rocio Garcia did a really good job at this, and I think that it definitely has its parallels with Lil Nas X getting kicked out of the country charts for his song Old Town Road, and it highlighted the clear double standard going on with black artists in the country genre, as people were quick to say, this isn't country, this isn't accepted here in our culture. And I think that that's a very important thing to talk about. Obviously, it's a little bit less important as something with the protests that were happening back in 2020, but it's still a pretty important topic that I think a lot of people should show empathy for. As someone who has ignored these issues in the past, surrounding marginalized people, I kind of realized after a while that I was speaking from a place of privilege. Saying that politics don't matter, or I don't really care about politics, is speaking from an area of privilege. And it's incredibly important to educate yourself on these topics and to take classes like this one, as I think everyone should be learning about this. I have taken classes around women in sexuality and intercultural communication that has really helped me a lot and helped me deepen my understanding between one another, and I think that it'll make for a better place. Another quote that I want to cite by the YW Boston article, "What is intersectionality and what does it have to do with me?" From this topic is, "Do not expect people who face different systems of oppression than you to rally for causes you care about if you do not rally for theirs." As you hear about others issues others face, learn about the work that is currently being done around these topics. Listen and defer to those who live with these intersectionality identities every day. As you do, you will likely deepen your understanding of your own identity and the subjects you care about the most. And I think that that is a really important thing, and that should be the takeaway if you get any other takeaway from this. In conclusion, um, queerness has played a crucial role in music, providing a platform for individuals to express their authentic selves and challenge societal norms. The intersectionality of queerness with gender identity, race, and ethnicity, and disability has created powerful music that has given the voice to the experiences and the identities of marginalized communities. As the music industry continues to evolve, it is essential to recognize the significant role that queerness has played and continues to play in shaping the industry's future. Lil Nas X's situation was one of the many other situations that helped me come to the conclusion that I was speaking from a place of privilege when I said that politics and these things don't matter. And I think that music is an important topic for that because it can bring people together and it can push these ideas in a way that they haven't been pushed before. To end things off, I want to recommend some albums and create more of a conversation. My email is jeremiahmurphy516 at gmail.com. If you ever want to talk about, music or topics like surrounding this, because it's honestly something that's become very salient to what I'm going to do in my career. Um, as you can see, here's a bunch of albums on screen. They're cut off, unfortunately, but I'll get into all of them. Flamboyant by Dorian Electra, in my opinion, is an album that I recommend. All of these albums are albums that I recommend, this which is why they're faced on here. But I think that Flamboyant talks about gender politics in a really digestible way. I think that the self-titled by Lavender Country really will help you understand the experiences more. I think Patrick Haggerty has a great pen and he's able to do it. Obviously, Montero by Lil Nas X. Couldn't not mention that one. Ma Rainey, who I talked about earlier. The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie that I talked about earlier. Blonde by Frank Ocean, as well as Flower Boy by Tyler the Creator, and Oil of Every Pearls on Insides by Sophie, which is another one kind of like Dorian Electra's. Both very, very great transgender artists that have done nothing but increase my awareness and kind of help me learn. Then you've got Project I Feel You by Valerie, which is one made by a young person who they've gone through a lot of different experiences that they story on this album, Project I Feel You, which just came out last year. And then you have the last one, Crying, Laughing, Loving, and Lying by Labrie Seafray, which is another great artist who's gay, who has a lot of good topics that he weaves into that album. And yeah, here are my sources and references. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. Once again, I decided to do this presentation again just because I felt like it would be good for the class to see it, and I kind of wanted to add audio to this. But thank you all for a wonderful semester. I hope you learned something. Once again, my email is jeremiahmurphy516 if you ever want to talk about music or anything like this. I'm looking forward to starting a conversation with you all, and I definitely recommend these albums. Thank you.